Again. All right, we're going holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. Again, we're going holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. We are in verse 4. Still in verse 4. The Torah says, Es mishpatai tasu, es hukosai tishmaru, lalechas be'em ani Hashem Elokeichem. So here, Torah says, you shall do my judgments, keep my ordinances, the ones that mitzvahs don't make sense, right? To walk therein. I am the eternal, your God. So we finished up last week the Kli Yakar, right? We finished that up, and we spoke about guarding laws that don't make sense, right? We spoke about that. And staying away from evil people, right? That's what we spoke about pretty much. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh, blessed memory, one of the great commentaries on Chumash. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh says, first thing is, he says, what's this whole chapter talking about? What are we speaking about before? So we're speaking about princess, about immorality, right? Immorality in general. So he says, so he asks the question, he says, after we're speaking about that, that's really what this is the topic of, right? Of these verses. He says, what are the chukim mishpatim? What are the laws I do understand? Or let's say better, the laws I don't understand. The laws that I do understand. What are these laws God commanded me? Right? In other words, up until this point, right, we've been talking about basically about immorality. Yeah, now it says keep these laws that make sense and keep these laws that don't make sense. Right? And go in your ways, Markesha. What's the connection? Right? What's the connection over here to immorality? That's first question. Also, why does it say lalechet behem, to go in their ways? Right? Well, why does it use that language? And we need to know that this is the second time that the Torah says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. That the Torah says, I am the Lord your God. It's very good. Right? Very good. Someone asked, I hear you said Or Chaim HaKadosh. Yes. Commentary on Chumash. Yes. One of the great commentaries on Chumash. I think more than 100 years ago. Rashi, obviously, more than 1,000 years ago. Ramban, more than 800 years ago. Even Ezra, also, like, I don't know, 800-900 years ago. As well as more, I guess I would say more recent commentator, but he's in pretty much every Chumash, right? So he certainly has a lot of clout. I don't think there's any question. In either case, the last question he says, why does it say Ani Hashem Elokeichem twice? All right, it says in this verse, and we're going to see one second. Yeah, I was going to say the next verse also. Right? In other words, so the Or Chaim over here says, or let's say better, the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here says, what's the connection? Right? In other words, why mention it? Why mention it twice? Right? Those are his three basic questions. So here, Or Chaim HaKadosh says, first thing is, what do we see before? Is that which we wrote before that the thought of immorality, he says, what does it do? The more a person thinks about it, the worse it is, right? The greater the desire for it, and it minimizes a person trying to fight against it. In other words, the more you feed it, right? The more you feed it, the more you want it, the worse it is. It's much harder to go according to the desires that God wants you to do, right? Go according to his will, let's say better. Yeah, it's going to prevent you from doing that, while at the same time, it's going to increase your desire, let's say for immorality. So here the Torah says, as Or Chaim Kadosh continues, the Torah says that a person has to stay. He doesn't make any distinction between men and women, right? It applies to both. It applies to both. That a person to stay away from this, right? Again, it's a very base desire that everybody has to be harnessed, obviously, in the right way. But obviously, the more a person thinks about it and wants it, the worse it is. Because the more a person is going to do that, what are they going to do? They're not going to have kids, right? They won't have kids. They won't do the mitzvah of Yibum, right? The mitzvah of Yibum, it doesn't really apply today. Really do chalitza. The mitzvah of Yibum is when, let's say, a person married, husband dies, and they don't have children. So if he's got a brother, that brother would marry this woman, and the child that they have a boy, and that child will be called after the dead husband, right? But we don't do that today because not everyone's going to have the right intention if they did this. So therefore, we do chalitza. We do. It's not very common. Definitely not very common. They, you do it in front of a lot of people. You bring the woman there. They have, a special shoe, and she spits. The whole ceremony, right? The whole ceremony exactly how it's done. But today they would do the mitzvah of chalitza instead of yibum. Regardless, it's not very common, right? Certainly in the Orthodox world, not very common, right? We wouldn't say that it is very common. That's why that when it happens, you publicize it, right? Because again, it's something that is, that doesn't happen very often. So I remember once took my Rebbe to one, and in his rabbinical court. They didn't have such a big room. Place was packed, absolutely packed, and they put signs all over the place. Again, it's not really, as we said before, it's not really, so common. So people want to go see, right? They want to go see, and it's just whatever the whole thing, how it's done, and this woman obviously is going to be much older, right? The much older woman, and she comes in there, and whatever, she has to wear the shoe, and she has to spit. And when she spits, everyone looks. Kind of gross, but everybody looks. Why? Because that's be clear, right? That whatever certain laws regarding this. Either case, not very common, but that's done instead of Yibum, right? We don't do, even though the whole tractate in the Gemara called Yevamos, which is all about these different laws and who's married to who, and do they have to do Yibum? They don't have to do Yibum. Whatever. It's very complex. Very complex. Nonetheless, definitely one of the harder tractates out there, right? In either case, Or Chaim HaKadosh over here says that if a person, is involved in, thinking about this too much, they won't have kids, they won't do Yibum, right? They won't do this mitzvah of Yibum, and they'll just be separate from the whole thing, right? They won't, they'll do whatever they do, I guess, on their own, and they won't do anything, right? When we get married, right? He's saying here, they won't have kids, person won't do evil, right? He won't do any of these things. So then it brings down for Gemara and Sukkah. Gemara and Sukkah says, one second, 52b. Anyone wants to look it up? Try and keep this clean here. The Gemara there says a person. Now it's talking about a man over here, right? Male organ over here. He says a person has a certain organ. Has a certain organ, and he says when it's satisfied, it's always starving. In other words, it always wants more. And when it's starving, it gets satisfied. Right? So it's like a never-ending vicious cycle. Not only that, but person would do that all the time. It weaken a person, no question. Right? But it's a very interesting statement, which far from me to argue. I mean, I'm a guy, so this does make a lot of sense, right? And that is that in order to satisfy, in other words, the Gemara says that that when it's satisfied, it's starving, and when it's starving, you're satisfied, it gets satisfied, It's like a never-ending cycle. In other words, once a person is satisfied, right, in general, right, let's say the guy over here is satisfied, very good. That doesn't stop the desire. That's the point, right? It does not stop the desire. Once a person has that desire, he wants more, right? It's certainly no question. So it's a never-ending, kind of like a never-ending cycle over here. And on that says Or Chaim Makadosh, he says that's what God commanded, and he said these mitzvahs that make sense you should do, and these other things you should stay away from. And these other things that are forbidden you stay away from. And I obligate you to do this, even though he says the laws that make less sense, right? A person still has to guard them, just like, forbidden relationships and all that are forbidden. So it's a very interesting. First thing he says over here is, what was the question? The question was, we're talking about forbidden relationships, which essentially we're going to get to at some point, right? After verse 5, when we start verse 6, and onwards till the end of the chapter, just about talking about forbidden relationships. The question he asked is, okay, very good. So if the whole chapter is all about that, then what does that have to do with going in keeping the commandments that make sense or don't make sense? Right? Markeshru. In other words, why, if there's juxtaposition of verses, as we always say, so there's a connection between one verse and another. So there should be a connection over here. But he says, what's the connection? What's the connection to this and immorality? Right? So he says, first of all, the more a person thinks about it, the more they want it, right? It prevents them from doing God's will. Why? Because that's where its thoughts are. Even though you tell me, its strongest urge. It's the strongest urge. It's the strongest urge that God gave, right? 100%. 100% strongest urge that God gave. Very good. But you have to use it, right? You have to use it in the right way. Okay. So the more a person thinks about it, what's it going to do? It's going to prevent him. It's going to prevent him from what? From doing God's will, right? Because that's where the thoughts are. That's where the thoughts are. And then he says, because of that, he's not going to get married. He's not going to have kids. He's not going to do yibum. Because all the time, what does the person want? To be satisfied. Well, the problem is, how can you be satisfied?
I told him just push it hard.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, you gotta mute yourself out here. Once a person is satisfied, what happens? They want more. Right? In other words, that the satisfaction never ends. Seemingly it never ends. Yeah, that's what he's telling you. So therefore, he says, at least on this part, right? He says that's why God commanded the commandments that do make sense, that you have to keep them and stay away from things that are forbidden. And that's what I obligated you to do. And even though the things that make less sense, very good, you have to guard yourself, right? Just like forbidden relations, right? Forbidden relationships. Very good. Yeah, now, this gets into a whole thing. This gets into a whole thing over here. Why? Because if you look at what the Torah says, and the Torah is going to tell you what forbidden relationships there are, and the Torah is going to get to eventually verse 22, right? Verse 22, we'll get there, I don't know when, right? Talking about homosexuality and bestiality. Yeah, and verse 23 as well, right? Bestiality, homosexuality, not going the ways of the Egyptians. It's also lesbianism, right? Got a lot of nice topics here, right? So, what would somebody tell me? What would somebody logically tell me? All these relationships, yeah, you'll say that's a normal thing, right? I mean, you'll say, well, you can't uncover the nakedness of your father or your mother, right? Or your aunt or your uncle or daughter-in-law, whatever. So these things, you say, okay, some things make more sense than others, right? Person saw nakedness of their father with a son. You're gonna say big deal, right? What like what's the big deal? We have the same organs. What's the big deal? Uncovering the nakedness of their mother, yeah, that would be, saw the nakedness of their mother, right? That might be a little bit different. You can say, come on, we're living in Victorian England. Over here, like, what's the big deal? Some people, you have, older kids, younger kids, the way they dress, the way the way they dress or don't dress, right? The way they dress or don't dress, a person will say what? They'll say, come on, we're the laws of modesty, right? In other words, we're going to get to what it means to uncover the nakedness over here. But, we're not saying incest per se. I mean, that might be one of them, right? Well, let's say, a mother gets undressed, yeah, and the child is there. Yeah, whether adult child, not whatever. You say, well, aren't there laws of modesty? Aren't there laws of modesty? Well, you go to the swimming pool, let's say. Okay, they're still covered to a certain extent, right? Not very much, but let's say they're still covered. Now, would anyone think in general this is an issue? No one's going to think in general, unless you're living in Victorian England or something like that, no one's going to think this is an issue. Yeah, no one's going to think it's an issue. Yeah. Why? Person that, again, a woman doesn't have to be that old, doesn't really matter, right? You go to the pool, you go to the beach. Yeah. A woman's dressed the way they are, guys dressed the way they are. You're there with your mother, at the beach. Yeah, they're gonna say big deal. like what's the problem? Now, does that mean literally uncovered nakedness? We're gonna speak about that. I mean, you have to actually see, or what if they're just not dressed modestly? Is that uncovering nakedness or not? Now, the thing he says over here is that even though these are laws, chukosai means laws that don't make sense, that are not logical, you still have to guard yourself against them, and they are forbidden. Now, if we go back, so in this, before we even go further, now, if we're going to say that, according to what the Or Chaim HaKadosh here says, would a person say in general, you take a survey, top 100 people, right? Family Feud here, top 100 people. He asked 100 people the following question. Person goes to the beach with their parents. Is there any prohibition whatsoever? The way they're dressed or not dressed, is that considered, according to the Torah, whether they hold by it or not, doesn't matter, is that considered uncovering nakedness or not? Now, what would most people probably say? Top 100 people surveyed, what would they say? All right, that's normal. Like, you go to the beach with a family, what's the big deal? Or you go to the beach when you're older with your kids and they come and whatever. You're going to say, I didn't cover any nakedness. I didn't do anything wrong. They're still covered up. Their private parts are covered up. Doesn't matter. If the mother's a shriveled up prune, whatever. So what? Nobody cares about that. Even being alone with somebody that's, a shriveled up prune that you're not allowed to be alone with, right? In general, still going to be forbidden. 100% is going to be forbidden. When we talk about, it's called yichud, being alone with someone of the opposite sex. In general, it didn't, first of all, whatever, it has to be usually an adult, but it could even be someone less than adult. That doesn't really matter for the, right now, but the idea would be someone will say, come on, you really think anything's going to happen, with this relative or cousin or, who knows what, and this person's a dried up prune, shriveled, dried up prune. They're 85 years old. Like, come on. You really think anything's going to happen? This and that? Still forbidden, right? Torah didn't make any distinction. There's no distinction over here. How old, how young, beautiful, ugly. Whatever person's mother got, I'd say she's ugly. No offense to any ugly mothers out there, right? But I'd say she's ugly. She's totally ugly in general. You say, well, it's the eyes of the beholden. Okay, but she's ugly in general. She could be young. Doesn't matter. If we're going to say, that she's ugly, does that apply? Right? It's only talking about someone, who's pretty. So what's the definition of that? It's going to change according to each person. Someone's going to say, oh, this person's really ugly. Okay. Someone's going to say they're not ugly. They're certainly not ugly. It's in the eyes of the beholder, right? Okay. So where do you draw the line? The rabbis say you don't draw the line. It's forbidden across the board. They're old, they're young, they're pretty, they're not pretty, they're dried up like shriveled prune, doesn't matter, right? 100% gonna be forbidden. Now, again, you'd ask the $1 million question here, and the $1 million question is gonna be somebody like, if you'd ask somebody, you go to the beach, with parents, with cousins, whatever. Is that uncovering nakedness or not? Right? Does uncovering nakedness mean we're gonna have to see this as we go through? What does that mean? Literally? Like no clothes on at all? Or does it mean they're immodest? And the nakedness you can see. Right? You don't have to be the daydream over here. Okay, so certain things are covered up, but let's say not covered up very well. But they're covered up. Okay. Right? How far does that go? Right? How far does that go? So most people would say, I would think, if I took a survey, most people would say it's a natural thing. That's what they're going to tell you. Right? That's exactly what they're going to tell you. Right? This 100%, it's a natural thing. It's natural. What's the problem? Right? Comes on the Torah, and the Torah says, Or Chaim HaKadosh here says, that what? It's forbidden. Even if it doesn't make sense. Still going to be forbidden to uncover this nakedness and everything else. It's going to be forbidden. Right? It's going to be forbidden for that. Right? It's going to see later. It's going to be forbidden to think about it a lot. Right? It's going to cause other problems. Very good. But, what would most people say? Most people say, no matter what age the person, in general, that's a natural thing. It's a natural thing, right? That's what a person's hormones think about. I mean, again, within reason. I'm not saying all the time, every last second, whatever, but he does say, right, very clearly, as he quotes the Gemara, right, as the Gemara says, that part of the body, right, when it's starving, it gets satiated. Yeah, but when it's satiated, it's also starving. Meaning, that desire never ends. It's a very, very strong desire. Very, very strong desire. So one thing here is, even if you tell me that it doesn't make sense. Now, again, a lot of people would say, I'm not saying everybody, but I would think a lot of people would say, in general, this is a natural thing. The natural thing is what people think. When they're teenagers and older, right? Hormones go off the charts. Very good. Yeah, that's a normal thing. Okay, right? So we're not going to disagree with that. It's a normal thing. Now the question is how you use it, right? Now everyone would agree, I would think, even if you don't act on it, the more a person thinks about it, the worse it is. Yeah, because then a person wants it. And if a person wants it, yeah, they'll do what they can to get it. Either way. All right, again, we'll keep this relatively clean. Yeah, but again, people will say that, there have to be limits. Now, I think everyone would agree there should be limits. Yeah, 100% should be limits. Now, even if there should be limits, yeah, would everyone agree? Right? He's telling you these laws, these are laws that don't make a whole lot of sense in general. Yeah, you still have to stay away from them. Right? You see, he's going to say uncover nakedness of children, right? Of kids or grandkids or whatever, right? That we're going to say. So say, okay, that's a different issue. Kids, incest, other things, you see it happens, right? We're not advocating it. You do see it happens, right? Totally forbidden. Nonetheless, nonetheless, there are things that people say, yeah, there are things you shouldn't do. Things that should be forbidden. Okay. But he's talking about in general. These other things we can understand naturally. Naturally, we could understand. But at the end of the day, if the Torah wouldn't tell me, let's say a person has two kids, boy and a girl, and they say, Mom, Dad, it's time to get married. Want to get married. Parents are like, it's a little bit strange. Two kids gonna marry each other. Yeah, like what we do about having kids, and genetic problems. No, we won't have kids. Not only that, it'll be cheaper. We'll invite one side of the family, right? You don't have big wedding. People say no. Now, why would they say no? Because it's weird, right? It's a very uncommon thing. You're gonna have, a brother and a sister marry each other. I'm not talking stepbrothers or whatever. It's another issue. Whatever. Talking about a brother and a sister. Brother and a sister marrying each other. Now, so you tell people, we're not going to have kids, so there won't be any genetic problem. There won't be any genetic problem. Yeah, we won't have kids. Save money on the wedding. Invite one side. Very good. You invite your family. Very good. Everyone comes, Beautiful. Now, most people would probably, I don't know, today, I don't know exactly today because people's minds are, totally messed up. But at the end of the day, there will be a lot of people say no. There's a limit. That cannot be done. You say, why? We're not going to have kids. We're never going to have kids. There's no genetic issue. There won't be any genetic issue whatsoever. We won't have kids. And I would think a lot of people would say that's just not normal. Today, I don't know. Maybe some people would say maybe it is a little more normal today. I don't know, right? But I think even today, people say it's going too far, right? That's going too far, even if you don't have kids. It's weird. Yeah. So, well, when we go through these, you'll see a lot of these make sense. Some of them you might say, well, an aunt, an aunt, an uncle, cousins, like what's the problem? Right? Why should there be a problem uncovering nakedness? But again, when it comes to a parent, you go to the beach, what's the problem? No one's going to see that as unnatural. They're going to see that's what people do. That's how you go to the beach. That's the way you're dressed. That's uncovering nakedness. That makes sense. If you tell me literally, person sees mother naked, it's kind of strange. In many ways, it should be a little more private, I would think. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe some people say, no, that shouldn't be done. But again, how many people are really going to have an issue with it? So now we're going to take it a little bit further. Right? Now, is that a natural thing? Right? Seemingly, a person will say, well, it's a natural thing. You're used to it. It's no big deal. It's your mother, your father, whatever. What's the big deal? It's a natural thing. It's a natural thing. Right? Or Chaim HaKadosh over here says, even if it doesn't make sense, you're still going to keep it. Very good. It's still going to be forbidden. Okay. Now we get to verse 22. Right? We're going to get to verse 22 at some point. Right? It says, a male is not allowed to lie with another male. Right? It's considered an abomination. I.e. homosexuality. Yeah, it's an abomination. Not the person, the action itself. Now, if, and then we're going to get to bestiality also. Very good. Right, the next verse. Okay. Now, some people will say, and they will still argue this, even though it's never been proven, they will argue this is natural. The attraction between a male and a male for some people is a natural thing. Totally natural. Yeah, that's the way they were born. Yeah, that's their tendency. Now, there are people that worship science, worship medicine, right? Let's say. So in normative medicine, or not normative medicine, has that ever been proven? Never been proven. Right? Statistically, never been proven. All right, I had someone tell me, this person was gay, whatever. They're born that way. And you can't say anything against it. So one word I got in, I said, but science hasn't proven it. But it's never been proven in medicine. Stop them straight there. That doesn't matter. Right? Cognitive dissonance. That doesn't matter. That's the way the person was born. Do you believe in science? You believe in medicine? Yes. Have they proven it? No. They don't care. Don't excuse me with the facts. I see this all the time. In so many other contexts. Do not mess me up with the facts. But these are the facts. They haven't been proven. Have not been proven. Right? Right? A doctor once told me, there's a gene which hasn't been proven. Okay. And they said a person who does that, yeah, now we're going to see, is this a natural thing coming out or not? Right? But a person who does so this person was claiming, this doctor was claiming, it's a natural thing. Right? So you can't expect anything otherwise. Why should they get punished? Good? Yeah. Now the question is, let's say they pinpoint it to a gene. Let's say. They haven't, but let's say they do. Right? Then someone would say, see, there's a gene. There's a gene that makes the person like that. Or makes them more biased towards it. Okay. Let's say it's true. Which has not been proven. But let's say it's true. Right? I'm a generous mood today. Let's say it's true. Yeah. We have a lot of bad genes. Someone may have anger genes. Someone may have, I don't want to get up in the morning and pray genes. Some people may have, I don't like eating matzah genes. Some people may have, I don't want to give charity genes. Yeah? You can have a lot of bad genes. Okay. Even if that would be true, and a person has certain bias, as we always say, and now it's part of your psyche, very good. So it makes it that much harder to fight against. Okay. Why God give it to you? Why did God give you a certain DNA? Yeah. What's the reason? Why did he give you these biases that we all have? Some have more more of certain things, less of certain things, doesn't matter. We're all made up of certain DNA. So a person could argue after 120 years after they die, God's going to say, well, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do the other thing? Right? So let's say these are things that are part of your psyche. That's the way you were born. Those are the genes you got. What would be the easy argument? The easy argument is you made me this way. So you can't punish me like, again. You can't punish me. Why can't you punish me? Because you made me that way. I had no choice. Yeah, I didn't have any say. You put the soul in the body, for better or for worse. Yeah, you gave me those type of genes. Right? God can say, very good. That's a great argument. I gave you those genes. Okay. Did I tell you to act on those genes? Did I tell you to do what your genes tell you to do? What's the person going to say? No. But you're going to say, I have more of a bias towards this, that, and the other thing. True. You have more of a bias. So why did God give it to you? Right? Right? Why did God give it to you? For you to overcome. We all have that. We all have these type of genes. Right? It's called bad character traits. Some of them are good character traits, obviously. Right? But they can be bad things that we got. That we're more susceptible to. Yeah, not just because it's environmental, whatever, because we're more susceptible to it. Why? Because it's in our DNA. Now, God could say, but I didn't tell you to act on it. Right? God can say, I didn't tell you to act on it. Very good. So we do have free choice. Someone there points out, very good, we do have free choice. Yeah, but even with free choice, what's the issue? Right? The issue is, let's say, a person has very strong tendency to anger. You know why they have a very strong tendency to anger? Because that's the way they were born. So anytime something doesn't go their way or they get frustrated or whatever, they burst out. They have a major burst out, right? A major burst out. So you can say it's part of my DNA. Now, even if that's part of your DNA, a person has a choice. Everyone always has a choice. You have a choice. Are you going to let it get to you? Are you going to exemplify it and just throw a fit? Because, someone just took your parking space and you were waiting 10 minutes and then someone just zipped in and took your space. Road rage, right? Whatever. Or a person can say, okay, that wasn't meant to be. Find another space, even though I had to wait 10 minutes, whatever. Okay. Right? Or is the person going to fly off the handle? Now, if they fly off the handle, they start yelling and screaming, whatever. Right? What could the argument be? The argument could be, that's the way God made me. That could be the argument. So that's what I do when things don't go my way for whatever reason. Scream. Right? You scream, you yell, you throw things, you break things. Right? So a person will say very easily, even though it's wrong, right? They'll say, well, this is the way I was made. If this is the way I was made, there's no repercussions because you made me that way. Very good. Right? It's a very good claim. What's God going to say? God's going to say, you're right. I made you that way. I gave you certain biases other people don't have. But they have certain things that you don't have. Very good. But I didn't tell you to do it. I didn't tell you to act on it. Right? So someone here says, well, you have freedom of choice. You do. Just because the person, even if they have a certain DNA, right? Even if they have a certain DNA, does not mean they have to act on it. So we'll give an example. A person inherits character traits from their parents. Now, the Torah says that a person may pay the price and may be cursed generations later, right, for what the parents did. So you're going to say, what the parents did, what does that have to do with me? Why would I get cursed if, let's say my parents or someone else's parents, it didn't go in the right way? Why do I get the curse? Right? Why my siblings get the curse? Not their fault. It's what the parents did. Right? This is what their parents did. Where does the curse apply? Right? The Torah doesn't tell you. The Torah just tells you 3-4 generations, whatever. There's going to be a curse from the kids to the parents, right? From the parents to the kids, whatever. What do the kids do? What do the kids do wrong? The parents did something they passed down to the kids. Okay, but the kids didn't do anything wrong. They got these bad character traits. Okay, why did they get the curse? They didn't start out that way. Parents gave it to them. Very good, or maybe not so good. Parents gave them the character traits. So what's going on? Torah doesn't tell me. Right? Yeah, another reason why you need a commentary here, because the Torah just says the kids are gonna be punished for the sins of the parents. Yeah, that's what the Torah tells me. Right? It's a big problem. What did the kid do wrong that they have to be punished because of what the parents did? Right? Logically it doesn't make sense. Right? No, the Torah is just telling you a fact. Right? A lot of times the Torah tells you do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing, do this, whatever. Very good, but doesn't give me any definitions. Right? This is why you need commentary. Because it doesn't give you any definition whatsoever. Right? And this is a good one. This is a good one. Right? Because it just makes a flat out statement. The kids will be punished for the sins of the parents. Why? Right? You see, this cannot be written by God, by man, right? Who would come up with such a thing? The parents did something wrong. The kids got to pay the price. Why do the kids have to pay the price? Yeah, in general. So what's the answer? So the Gemara says the reason is, the case is if the child goes in the same crooked ways as the parents. If the child learns badly from the parents and their bad character traits, then the curse applies. But that doesn't mean the child has to go in the way of the parents. What if the child, let's say, becomes an Orthodox Jew, becomes a Noahide, right? They leave Christianity, whatever. They don't go in their negative ways. So then the curse doesn't apply, right? But if they go in the same way, because it's not their fault, right? We'll quote the Three Stooges, right? I'm a victim of circumstance. What do you mean? That's the way it was. I inherited these bad character traits. I got these bad genes. Yeah, I got all these bad genes. It's their fault. Because they gave me these bad genes. Yeah, so why do I have to pay the price? You pay the price if you act on those bad genes. That's where you pay the price. But if you go against those negative things, then that curse doesn't apply. Right? That's an amazing thing. Because otherwise, the Torah doesn't make any sense over there. Parents, I don't know, let's say the parents are alcoholics or who knows what, right? So now these negative things, right, a lot of times, right, I don't know exactly what the stat is, but there's a very high percentage of people that are kids of alcoholics, they themselves become alcoholics or drug abusers, right? It's a high percentage, right? They're more susceptible. Yeah, they're more susceptible. Now, does the kid have to go in that direction? No. Are they more susceptible? Yes. Yeah, but if they don't go in that direction, they lead quote unquote a normal life, let's say, they don't get the curse. They will not get that curse, even though it's part of them. Right? In other words, God, even if God put it in your DNA, He does not want you to act on it. And if you do act on it, you get punished for it. Right? There is going to be payback. And the reason it's going to be payback is because even if a person has a certain bias, whatever the bias is, that doesn't matter. Right? Whatever the bias is, God says, I don't want you to act on it. If it's something negative. Okay. But you're going to say you have free choice. Good. We do have free choice, but what's the problem? What's the obvious problem? The obvious problem is if we inherit it or we do it to ourselves. Let's say we inherit it. We'll make it easy, right? You inherit these bad character traits. Okay. Now, even if you inherit them, the problem is they become part of you. Now, once they become part of you, it's not as easy to fight against. Why? Because this is part of your psyche now. This is the norm in which you live with. Okay. So if it's the norm in which you live with and it's part of your everyday, whatever you do, yeah, and it's part of you, that makes it 10 times harder to fight. Now, what if you did it to yourself? Let's say you did it to yourself. So you did it to yourself. Also makes it harder to fight. Why? Because the person constantly does it. That's what he's talking about over here, right? Especially with immorality. The more a person constantly does it, the harder it is to stop, right? And the Orchaim Kadosh over here says it will prevent you. He's talking about immorality here, but he can apply it to other things. But this is a very strong thing. He says it will prevent you from doing God's will. It will prevent you from doing God's will. Now, does that mean you can't fight against it? No. He's not saying you can't fight against it, but he's saying it's going to be very hard to fight against. Because here you're talking about a case where you have a part of the body that's never satisfied. And even when you do satisfy it, it wants more, right? So therefore, right, therefore, what do you have? It's much harder. Now again, there are communities and groups of people like this goes out the window. Yeah, because they're totally immodest amongst each other. So they're mentioned by certain Indians, whatever. Yeah, that's true. You see pictures, they're all immodest. You don't see modesty by them, right? Now again, so they would say that's the norm. What's the problem? They would say, no big deal. It's part of the body, whatever. We show it, no big deal. No one's going off the rails, so to speak, and taught certain things, whatever it is. It's no big deal. They would think this is ludicrous. This is what the Torah says over here, right? That you got to stay away from it anyway. It's ludicrous. That's what they would say, God forbid. But that's what they would say, right? I would think that's what they say. Because they're going to say this is a natural thing. Yeah, it's part of the culture, right? If it's part of the culture, it's a natural thing. So you can use that argument potentially. I'm not saying you could. You see what's going on around the world with LGBTQ, and they're going to say it's also part of the culture, and they're ramming it down everybody's throat. Yeah, parades and this and that. You can't say anything against it and whatever. Okay, but they're ramming it down everybody's throat. That they're making it part of the culture. That's part of the norm. It's not going to be everybody, but then, like what's the big deal? Yeah. So the Orchaim HaKadosh over here is telling you that even if, in this case, if something doesn't make sense logically, then you still have to keep it. It's still going to be forbidden. So again, now you go to verse 22, right? We're going to get there. Like I said, I don't know when, but we're going to get there. And you're going to see, he talks about homosexuality. Very good. Yeah. Some people say that's normal for those people. That's a normal thing, right? This doesn't make sense because people were born that way. Yeah. But again, we prove that's not true. Right? So part of the culture says it's part of the Indian culture. Okay. That may be part of Indian culture. But again, if you'd explain to them, the Torah says it's totally forbidden and, it's immoral and this and that, they'll say that's what we do. That's the norm. That's not like, oh, come on. Like, what are you so prude? What did you grow up in Victorian England? Like, come on, be real. We don't have any problem with promiscuity. We don't have any of these issues. They're used to it. That's what it is. Right? That's what it is. Yeah, but I'm saying you could argue, isn't that now part of secular culture in the world? Is it LGBTQ? You say, well, it's not such a big movement. Well, it is. They got a lot of power, tremendous amount of power. Yeah. Now, numbers, okay, you have to see how many people really, identify not being heterosexual and all that. Okay. And do a survey. And do a survey would be interesting just to see maybe what the numbers are. Let me just see here just for curiosity's sake. Yeah, just in the US, how many are there? 9.3% of US adults, or roughly 20 to 30 million people. That's interesting. Identifies LGBTQ. It's 10%. All right, 9.3%. Yeah. last year. Stats from 2024, 2025. Yeah, high percentage among younger generation, 70% of Generation Z. Okay, whatever. Okay. Some say it's between 7.6%, around 20 million. Some say it's 9.3%. Whatever. That's a pretty big percentage. Yeah. If you tell me like it's 1%, it's 0.5%, it's 0.25%, right? Let's say, okay, right? It's a much smaller percentage. 9%, 9.3%, let's say better. Let's say these stats are true. 9.3% is not a small number. Not a small number. The bigger scheme of things, you say, okay, right? How many people in America? 350 million. So, like, yeah, so it's less than 10%. Okay. Or 300 million, whatever it is. Yeah, 10%. It's not a small number. Definitely not a small number. But you think about the majority of people are going to look at themselves as being, heterosexual and whatever. Okay. Right? It's only going to be the majority. Should be the majority. By a lot. Right? Very good. Very good. But they're trying to ram it down everybody's throat. They have a big say in a lot of things, a lot of power. Very good. Right? So it sounds like numbers should be higher than that. But, let's say. So there's an issue here. There's an issue here. What's considered the norm? 50 years ago, still existed. There were plenty of gay people out there. Just, we were, in the closet. No one came out. No one was bragging about it per se. Some people were, right? But everything was like hidden away in different ways. In different ways. But they want to bring out. See, this is the point. They want to bring out that that's the new norm. Yeah, and that's why they're going to indoctrinate kids at the age of 6, 7, 8, whatever. Say, how do you know you're in the right body? Right? A cousin of mine told me, like, his daughter was 8 or 9. It's like, yeah, she took it pretty good. I was like, you don't think it's weird? You don't think it's like strange? They're trying to convince, your schools are trying to convince people that, your kids are in the wrong body. It's like, whatever, that's, that's education. Not brainwashing, it's education. That's insanity. They don't have any knowledge. 8, 9-year-old, even if they're teenagers, they don't have so much knowledge. They think they do, right? They don't have a lot of knowledge either. So, people experiment, different things, whatever. Okay, but they want to make it part of the culture, right? That's what they want. They want to make it as like it's a normal thing. Yeah, give them more rights and different things. Okay. Right. Now, the question's going to be over here. The question is, what is considered normal? Yeah. What is considered normal? So if you'd ask a person, if you go to the beach with your parents, and you're older, whatever, it doesn't matter. Is that a problem? Is that a problem? Right? So again, even if in general, no nakedness is uncovered, right? Is uncovered again. Someone will say, well, uncovered means totally naked. Okay. That could be one of the definitions, right? I guarantee a child has probably seen the parents naked. Probably. Yeah. Either on purpose or not on purpose, right? It's probably happened. So you say, well, the child's not liable. Very good. Very good. But even so, uncovering nakedness, you could argue that's what it means. Could argue that. Could argue it means, everyone's in the wrong, right? That's what it means. Yeah. That's what it means. But uncovering nakedness does not, doesn't necessarily mean that. You don't need, it's not, if a guy's wearing shorts, so not wearing a shirt, let's say, you don't need so much imagination. A woman, same thing. She's wearing a bikini or who knows what, right? Same thing, right? Same thing. Okay, you're not seeing exactly, but there's no, no great, no great imagination. You see models, guys shouldn't see this, but whatever. A woman, prances around in a bikini. You say, well, for a guy, we'll keep this clean. Why just take it all off? So, use your imagination. Well, it's not so much imagination you need to use, right? So you think, wow, looking at someone dressed immodestly, is that uncovering nakedness? Right? Literally, you tell me no. Some will say, no. It means you got to see the nakedness. Yeah. Yeah, but when it comes to immodesty and it comes to immorality, maybe it doesn't mean that. Maybe it means I just have to, see enough of the outline, in the flesh, so to speak. Maybe that's enough, right? But in either case, this is a very fundamental question. And the fundamental question is, what is considered normal, right? So we're looking at what normalcy is according to the Torah. We don't care what other people think, right? We're looking exactly what the Torah says, right? What does the Torah tell me? Is this a natural thing, right? Or is this something where it doesn't make logical sense? I still have to keep it, right? So comes the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, and the Or Chaim HaKadosh here says, you got to stay away from it. You're obligated to keep what the Torah says, right? Even so, these laws that you have to guard that don't make sense, right? And what are the laws he's talking about? The laws he's talking about are immorality. Those are the laws he's talking about, right? That don't make sense. Now, he could have said other laws. Could have said many other laws that don't make sense, right? But why is he not going to? Just delve in a little bit deeper here, right? What's the obvious reason? What's the obvious reason he's not going to say that? Because the whole chapter is talking about immorality, right? Whole chapter is talking about immorality. Now, the whole chapter is talking about immorality. Yeah, in general, these things are not so obvious. Now, sometimes the Torah is going to tell you things that are obvious anyway, that are universal, right? Even by non-Jews, there should be universal laws. Should be universal laws, of modesty. Now, it's interesting, you take the Indians, use them as an example, right? So that doesn't seem to be an issue with them. Yeah, regardless how much they show. Yeah, but look at secular society in general. So you tell me, okay, people are not walking around totally naked. Very good. Yeah, certainly not like that. Okay. But the way people dress, certainly when it's warm, in the summertime, it doesn't lead to much imagination, because of what they're not wearing, right? Let's say, or they're not covered the way they should be. Let's be nice, right? Let's be nice here. So, you run into the same issue. You definitely run into the same issue, but people are not, people in general today, they're not going to see this as an issue at all. They're going to see this as this is a natural thing. This is the way people dress, right? This is the way people dress. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, right? What's the difference? It's the way people dress. If you have certain thoughts, the way, because of the way they dress or whatever, so that's your problem. You're right. It is your problem. 100%. It's a person's problem. Very good. Yeah, but what's the issue here? Right? The issue is what it leads to. Yeah, in a person's thoughts. What the Or Chaim HaKadosh here tells you, the more a person thinks about it, in general, again, he doesn't make a distinction between men and women. For men, it'd be worse, right? But he doesn't make any distinction, just like the Rambam. The Rambam says that when we say the Shema, when we say the third paragraph of the Shema, we say, Lo sasur acharei levavchem ve'acharei nechem. You don't go after your eyes, you don't go after your, you don't go after your hearts, you don't go after your eyes. Right? Who does that apply to? The Rambam there makes very clear. Who's it talking about? Men and women. No distinction. No distinction. Yeah. So you tell me, woman goes to visit her parents, right? Let's say they're in assisted living, whatever. They're in Florida. There's, somebody somewhere warm, whatever. They go there and, much older men, are dressed in, in tank tops and shorts, right? That's how they go around. Because it's warm. They're not going to wear pants or whatever, or they're not wearing a shirt at all. Yeah? Is that an issue? So you tell me it's an issue. It also applies to women. Doesn't just apply to men. So you got to be careful what you see either way. Not just, a man can't look. Doesn't matter. She's a shriveled up prune or not. It's irrelevant. So you say it applies more to a man and a woman. In some ways, yes, but the Rambam doesn't make a distinction. The Rambam says it applies equal to men and women. Not straying after your heart, not straying after your eyes. Why is to both? Why is to both equally? Now, that being the case, a person goes out in the summer, the way people are dressed, let's say for a guy, make it very easy, right? You can't look at anything. The way people are dressed. Yeah, so you go shopping. I remember when I was in South America. I would do the shopping. So they had these posters, advertising, different things. The supermarket, very good. So you tell me, okay, maybe Europe or South America, a little more risque, than in the States, let's say. Their posters are almost pornographic. Almost. Yeah. Like, they got these pictures, you're trying to look at peaches or plums or apples, and they got this thing standing right in front of your face. Yeah. So again, you can tell me, okay, maybe that culture is a little bit different, more risque than other places. Okay. Yeah. Whatever you want to say, but they got to be careful either way. Either way. So there'll be men who, if they walk outside, they look down, they don't look at anything. Because they don't want to look at anything. Now, hopefully they don't bump into anything, but that's the whole point. Right? That is the whole point. If they don't want to go after their eyes. Because once a person starts having these thoughts, and they're very strong thoughts, you got to be very careful. Because again, what does the Orach Chaim HaKadosh here say? The Orach Chaim HaKadosh here says that it prevents you from doing God's will. Right? It prevents you from doing what God wants you to do. Because that's all a person thinks about. Right? For better or for worse. Yeah? Yeah. So again, this is a guy talking, but it's not always by men. Right? So it certainly can be can also be certainly by women. Right? Now, so again, what does normalcy look like? Right? So something there mentioned, it's mentioned here, about pedophilia. Yeah, is normal among pedophiles. Okay. Yeah, but that's not the norm. It's the norm for them. Yeah, let's say. Right? But I have heard, people say, and it's probably true. I don't have any reason to argue on it. Right? And that is most likely someone who is a pedophile was probably, acted upon without their will when they were younger. In other words, someone probably did it to them, so they end up doing it to someone else. Yeah, whatever. I've heard people, certainly in the know, spoken about, spoken about that. And, basically say once a pedophile, always a pedophile, it never stops. Like you put them in jail, it's not going to stop them. I mean, you cut the thing off or damage it or whatever. Okay, so then they can't do it. Make them into a eunuch or whatever. Okay, the whole question if you're allowed to do that, even according to Torah, but that's the only way to stop it, right? According to quote unquote modern medicine psychology, there's once they're acted upon, they'll do it. Most likely, they'll do it to someone else. Most likely, right? It doesn't have to be, but it usually doesn't stop, right? But again, that's not. No one's going to say that's normal. Right? Everyone's going to say that. You're right. According to them, that's the norm. Yeah, but in society in general, not that we care, right? But in society in general, everyone looks down upon it. Everybody looks down upon it. No one says it's okay. Yeah, and not only that, sex offenders, every community, they'll know who sex offenders are, right? They will absolutely know, and they're obligated, to put these people in public forum, and people should know, stay away from them, right? So obviously, if they're doing that, then that's quote unquote according to the law. Yeah, the land, the law of the land, very good. They're telling you, yeah, it's not a normal thing, right? It's for sure not a normal thing. You stay away from it, right? Stay away from these type of people. Very good. But again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, if it's normal among them. We're looking at society, society in general. There's no truth today. There's no absolute truth today in the secular world. Everyone does whatever they want to do. Things that were forbidden or unheard of 50, 60 years ago at my parents' generation or longer, even though things were going on anyway behind people's back, it wasn't so much in the public, nonetheless. Today it almost becomes a mitzvah. Like, people parading, in public and saying this is what we do. Imagine, pedophiles did that. Adulterers did that. Thieves did that. I don't know. I think a lot of different groups that the Torah says is forbidden, right? Well, to do, and you have everyone prancing around, bragging about what they do. You don't see that. right? You definitely don't see that. This you see because they want to make this part of the norm. That's what they want. They want people to see it as something that A, is not to be shied away from, and B, that's the way it is. That's the norm, right? Or part of the norm. And if someone chooses it, okay, that's their choice. You can't ostracize them, right? But they're ramming it down your throat to make it quote unquote, quote unquote normal, right? But again, all these things do the exact same thing, right? The Or Chaim HaKadosh here says, all they do is prevent the person from serving God properly. That's what they do. That's what they do. But it's not like they're taking something, that's small per se, or it's insignificant. Yeah, they're taking the greatest urge that God gave and going haywire. Right? No other word to explain it. It's going out of their minds. And going to the nth degree because they can. Right? And they want people to acknowledge that it's normal. Right? That's the problem. That is exactly the problem. Right? So yeah, normal is relative. But if you look at these, the point here is, if you look at these verses, that talk about, immorality, the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here is calling them laws that don't make sense. Now, we can try and make sense of them, right? And we'll see as we go through them. But he's telling you these are laws that don't make sense. Yeah. Now, some of them should make more sense than others. Okay. But again, if we're going to go according to the populace, which we don't normally care either way, and you would ask them about these things, right? That is the point. If you would ask them, if you would ask them about these things, they're going to say that's the norm. Yeah, they're gonna think you're the craziest person in the world, that you live in, Victorian England, and and you're totally prude and all that. They're gonna think you're off your rocker. They'll think you're off your rocker for other things, but for sure, they're gonna think you're off your rocker because they're gonna say it's a normal thing. It's very common. So if it's very common, why should the Torah come out against it? Right? They're going to see it as something like so off the wall, right? Like someone told me, I'll tell you how far it goes, right? I'll tell you how far it goes. Someone once told me many years ago, they said, if you go to a beach, you go to a mixed beach, yeah, talking to a guy, right? Talking to me. So it says, if you go to a beach, again, we'll keep this clean. You go to a beach, you see women, let's say, not dressed so modestly, bikinis, who knows what, right? Now, if you get excited, there's a problem with you. That's what the person said. So I answered, I said, if you don't get excited, then there's something wrong with you, unless you're a eunuch, whatever. Or you just don't like women and you care less how women look or whatever, however much or not, they have clothes on. So this is something, said many, many years ago, right? Maybe 30 years ago, maybe more. Yeah, could be more. Someone said that's not normal. I think, what do you mean it's not normal? Yeah. In other words, you have to go there and suppress any feelings you have. Okay, can't act on it, especially if you're married or whatever, but still. Doesn't mean when a person got married, that means they're dead sexually. Doesn't mean they have no, they never have any attraction, someone of the opposite sex outside of their spouse, right? That definitely doesn't mean that per se, but look at what the person said. Yeah. Now, to a certain extent, what they said may be true. To a certain extent. Right? In other words, you got to control your thoughts. Okay. That's true. You got to control your thoughts. Right? But at the same time, what would you think? What would you think? What's the norm? For a guy, in general. Even for a woman. Doesn't matter. Right? As Rambam says, no distinction here. Right? Person could have certain thoughts. So this person will say, you got to suppress them. Right? It's not normal. It's not normal if you would get, a little bit excited. Why not? the strongest urge God gave. You stick a pretty woman, let's say, or a very handsome guy in front of somebody, or they see them, yeah, and they see them, and they have certain thoughts. They didn't act on it, but they have certain thoughts. You're going to tell me that's not normal? That is normal. Now, unless you're not attracted to the other side, to the opposite sex. Okay. So then you're not attracted. Very good. But that's normal. That's the norm. So that was my answer. I said, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you. I'm not saying you act on it, right? It's a normal reaction. The totally normal reaction. Yeah, but that's how, this is talking probably more than 30 years ago. Yeah, probably more than 30 years ago. Yeah, but that's how far it goes. In other words, okay, a person has to, suppress themselves, not act out, not think about it, this and that, we thought the problem's good. Very good. But to say you should never have that reaction is absurd. It's a normal reaction. Not saying you should do it. Not advocating it, right? But is it a normal reaction? It's a normal reaction. Absolute normal reaction. Someone asks, could it be the way a person is raised? Yeah, there's different sensitivity. Now, a person, let's say they're raised in Indian culture. So the way they look at sexuality is very different. Because they grew up with it. Then, it's all people naked, basically. All the time. Or a lot of the time. So that's the norm, right? According to them. Right, that's the norm. It could be. There's less sensitivity. Right? But today, today I would say everyone's affected by it. Right? Anyone's ever had a TV or watched, a movie, and that there is immorality, so to speak, they're exposed to it, even when they're younger. When they're much younger, they're exposed to it. So everybody's exposed to it. Now, the question is, what's the person going to do? So they're much younger, they don't necessarily know what's going on per se. Maybe yes, maybe no. Depending on the age or whatever. But they are exposed to it, right? Everybody part of that culture, they're exposed to it. 100% they're exposed to it. Yeah. So some may be exposed more to it, some less to it, but anyone, I would say anyone who goes to public school or anyone has a TV or a phone and they've watched commercials have plenty of innuendos, they watch movies, they watch other things, 100%. Yeah, 100% everyone's affected by it. So, some more, some less, but, everybody's affected by it, So, the question is, what's the person do with that? What do they do with that? Obviously not going to act on it depending on the age, whatever, but makes an impression, right? It certainly makes an impression. But, people today, again, I'm trying to keep this a little bit clean. Yeah, people today are sexually active at a much younger age today. Yeah, but in public school and all that, what do you expect? If you have boys, it has been proven, by the way, also that if you have co-ed schools, which most schools are co-ed, yeah, that they don't do as well scholastically. Now, why don't they do as well scholastically? What's the reason? Because they're distracted. Why are they distracted? Well, the birds and the bees, right? That's why they're distracted. Yeah. For better or for worse. There is distraction. Yeah, so they won't perform as well scholastically because, trying to attract someone of the opposite sex. Have a boyfriend, girlfriend, this, that, whatever. Yeah. So that's a major distraction. But everyone is subjected to it. Everyone, if you're part of that culture, there's no, unless you live in a cave or something, you never came in contact with any of this stuff. You never left. You never saw posters, this and that. Yeah, so you're not exposed to it. But everyone else, 99% of everyone else, they're exposed to it. Even take, religious Jews are also exposed to it. They work, the way people dress, what they talk about, Let's say they go to sporting events. Let's say people, totally dress modestly. I mean, it depends on the sporting event, right? I'm not talking about a football game where it's freezing cold, right? You go to a game, you go to a baseball game. I don't think, it's boiling hot or can be warm. Yeah, people are not going to be dressed, not going to be dressed appropriate, let's say. So they hear things, they see things. They're not blind to it. They're not blind to it. But if you grew up in that culture, which most people did, if you grew up in that culture, there's nothing to talk about. You're exposed to it all the time. You're exposed from a very young age, from a very, very young age, right? So today, kids, I think, I wonder what the stat is. Just curious. Um, let me see here. Um, let's see. They give me an answer. More than 50% of children engaged in form of sexual behavior before the age of 13. I think it's younger than that. I think it's even younger than that. Sometimes it can be even 10, 11-year-olds, not expected for their age or development, whatever. Okay. Yeah. But it's even younger than the age of 13. Right? It's before the age of 13. What are the stats? Sexual experience adolescents increased of age, 20% of 12-year-olds, 52.7% of 13-year-olds. Very interesting. This is a government thing here. Let me just see here. 1 second. 20% of 12-year-olds, 52.7% of 13-year-olds, 60.1% of 14-year-olds, 73.6% of 15-year-olds, and 90% of 16-year-olds reported having intercourse at least one occasion. That's a pretty scary stat. Yeah, more boys of all ages are sexually more active than girls. Okay, whatever. By the time you're 16, you're not a virgin anymore. Essentially, right? I mean, 60% of 14-year-olds, 52%, 0.7 of 13-year-olds, 28% of 12-year-olds. Okay, so even less than that's probably stats are going to be less. Okay, yeah, let's say these stats are, let's just say they're accurate. Let's say they're accurate. By the age of 16, the person lost their virginity. Yeah, that's a very high percentage. 90%, according to this. When was the study done? This is 1989. In 1989. So it's probably higher than that. I would think it's higher than that. Yeah, let's see. Let's see if there's anything. Um, oh, this is 2025. Let's see. Let's see. All right, it's going to be 6 to 12. Privacy. All right. Yeah, 1 second. Just want to see if they have any stats here. Um, all right, I don't see. All right, I don't see any stats there. Whatever. Let's just say for argument's sake, that's true. Let's say those stats are true. That's a scary number. Scary number. Now, even if that's true, yeah. So what are they doing to stop it? I would think it's getting worse, just because they're trying to educate kids at a younger age that they're in the wrong body. So they could be, so that the numbers could be higher. Numbers certainly could be higher. Yeah. So that's a scary stat. But why is that? So you tell me, because it's hormones, this, that. But again, society's gone crazy. Society, you tell somebody, especially a girl, to wait till you're married. I don't know. Maybe some, will try, but guess what? They're not gonna have a boyfriend. That's all a guy wants in general. Guy's never gonna be happy just walking down the street and say, "Oh, I'm happy holding your hand." I can't imagine that, right? There's a guy talking here, so that's very hard to imagine, right? So 90%. Let's say that's true. Let's say that's true. 90% of 16-year-olds. That's a scary statistic. Yeah. So I would think the numbers probably are higher, and probably kids experimented even younger age, even younger age. Yeah. Now it doesn't mean they necessarily had intercourse, but whatever. Younger age. Younger age, they're experimenting also. But that's the way of society. That is 100% the way of society. You'll say that, that's the norm. Now, if you ask a parent in general, you ask a parent of a daughter, or they have a number of daughters, is that what you want for your daughter? I think everyone would agree and they say no. Should wait, should be more mature, this and that. Okay, they go off to college. Victor Miller he said many years ago, many years ago, Victor Miller was one of the Torah giants of the last generation, said that a dormitory and a college is like a brothel. Now, again, 18 years old. A mixture, maybe different floors, whatever, right? But, what's going on there? So you want to tell me by the time they finish college, and there are responses written on this, that someone who went to college, lived in a dorm, 100% they're not a virgin. Like, there's not even a question. Not even a question. Yeah. Now, you tell me it starts earlier. Okay. Yeah, that's probably true. But when you get to that point, they're on their own, they're whatever. Probably some of it probably has to do, with alcohol, because, when a person drinks, they have less inhibitions. But again, it doesn't have to, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Right. But you look at these places, you look at these things, and you're going to say, well, like, what do you expect? My parents says, well, I didn't send my kid for that. Well, that's the society we live in. That's the society we live in. Right? Now, people may not like to hear that, but that's the norm. That is the norm. Again, let's say, these stats are not that far off. Yeah. By the time they're 16, it's 90%. It's a huge number. Is it shocking? No. Now, if you tell me it was like 70% of like 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds, yeah, that'd be kind of shocking. That would be that low. But a person would start, they are exploring at younger ages. I don't think there's a question. I'm not saying they're going all the way, whatever, but like, they are definitely experimenting, probably. Because that's what's around them. You gotta tell me they don't cuddle, they don't kiss, they don't this. I don't think so, probably younger ages. But again, going that far at 16 is not surprising. Definitely not surprising. But the problem is, as we said before, everyone's exposed to it. That's the problem. Everybody's exposed to it. So what do you expect? What in the world do you expect? I mean, I went to camp back in the day. It was a sports camp. I was still going strong of 90 years. More than 90 years, a Jewish sports camp, whatever. It's all boys. It's all boys. Yeah. Right. Any incidents, whatever. All male counselors, this and that. Yeah, whatever. But, by the time they're, 11 and 12, they're socials. It's girls' camps. A couple times in the summer. Yeah. That's what goes on. So not shocking. And everything around them, that's what they're selling. That's exactly what they're selling all around. TV ads, other type of ads, digital ads. There's the whole thing, whatever. I just saw that, people looking at things in digital things, not just in person. Not just in person. But what are people looking to do? Be with somebody. Yeah. But it's common. Now, now there are parents, I guarantee, probably want them to be more mature and be older and this and that. Okay. They don't have a say. Certainly they don't have a say. You can say what they want. That doesn't mean they're going to listen. Right? That doesn't mean kids are going to listen. But what would I say? It's out there. Right? It's out there. High school kids have a party. What do you think's going on there? What do you think's going on in someone's house? Parents aren't home or whatever. What do you think they're doing? Probably drinking. Right? Maybe some drugs there, whatever. But doing other things also. Right? That's the norm. I mean, I grew up with it. I don't think it's changed. It's probably got worse in different ways. But that's the norm. right? And tell them, tell them in that society. Now, girls might want to hear this. Women might want to hear this. Guys don't want to hear it. Guys really don't want to hear it. For women, it's like an eye opener. Definitely an eye opener. Women can abuse men just as much as men can abuse women. It goes both ways. Definitely goes both ways. Okay. But this is what people do. I don't, it's not uncommon, right? But to tell people that, this is a thing that doesn't make sense, right? But this is very common in society. They're going to say, but once you explain it to someone, they'll get it. They'll, once they think about it, they'll definitely get it. But what will they say though? Most likely they'll say, but I have free choice. I have free choice. I can use my body for what I want. And if that's what I want to do, my choice. 100% my choice. Right? It's 100% my choice. Okay? Yeah, they make the bed they lie in, no pun intended. But to tell them that that's abnormal, and that, shouldn't be common, and that's like something that doesn't make sense, they're going to think you're crazy. They're going to say this is the way of the world. Everyone will say that. And it's their choice. But again, if you would ask a parent of girls, if they have daughters, and you ask them, is this what you want for your daughter? Now I can't imagine everyone's gonna say yes. Right? There are parents that will say, no, it's not what I want. But I don't have a choice. They're mature enough, this and that. Okay, they make their own choice. But deep down, does that want to, if parents have no values, then yeah, so okay. Whatever floats their boat, just don't get pregnant. Okay. They make their choice. Yeah. Do they want that? Is that really the ideal they want for their child? I don't think so. Right? Some may say it's their choice, whatever. Okay. That's what some people will say, and they don't have an issue with it. But I think some people would have an issue with it. Some that would be somewhat more traditional. But in today's society, anything goes. Back in the 1990s, it was the 1990s, or the early 2000s, Madonna came out with a book. She wrote a book, about sex, that there should be no inhibitions. Nobody should have any inhibitions at all. Now you see what's the end result of that? What does society do in general? They see it all over. How can a person not be affected? Unless you're totally numb to it, right? Which could be also because you see it so often that it doesn't register. It doesn't register. People do not see it as an issue. That's society. That's the way it is. Somebody asks, how am I supposed to treat or behave towards family who are homosexual? Doesn't make any difference if they are Jew or non-Jew. What if they're a really good person other than them being gay? Is it worse for a man or a woman? It's worse for a man, 100%. The reason it's worse for a man is Torah prohibition. For a woman, to be a lesbian is a rabbinic prohibition. And that's what the Torah says, don't go in the way of the Egyptians. So the rabbis learn out going in the way of the Egyptians means not to be a lesbian. That's one of the things it means. So it's definitely worse for a man, it's a Torah prohibition, death penalty. I think a woman does not get death penalty. For a guy gets death penalty. But it's still forbidden for a woman as well. So that answers that question. What if they're a really good person? So I would tell you, even if they're a good person, now again, doesn't mean you have to ostracize them. And they probably know what your stance is going to be anyway. So you don't have to, I wouldn't say you have to give them musar. They're not going to listen anyway. Right? So, can you have them for dinner? So you can have them for dinner. Yeah, can you go out with them? I don't know. I guess you could go out with them. What if they say, let's go out with my partner? So then that's a different issue. Certainly for a Jew, you can't recognize that. You say, okay, if you want to go out, it's just me and you, right? But, your partner can't go. That's going to cause friction, right? I don't think it's any different. It might be a little bit different than, let's say a person has a sibling that's intermarried, right? It's married to a non-Jew. So you don't want your kids having any contact with their kids because they're going to think, oh, these are my cousins, but they're not really Jewish, right? And to invite them, and this is what I was told, that to invite them, both of them, that's forbidden, right? If you want to invite your family member, you could, without their spouse. That also cause friction, most likely. But let's say you go somewhere, I don't know, a person, let's say it was by their in-laws, they happen to be there. Okay, but you don't have to leave, right? You don't have to leave. You don't make a scene, obviously, right? But to have them in your house is like saying it's okay. Having both things, say, but it's family, blood is blood, right? Right? Blood is thicker than water, right? Anyone ever hear that? Blood is thicker than water. Yes, it is. And family is family, yeah, till they intermarry. Okay. That's a difference. They make a choice, right? They make a choice. They say, listen, no offense. No offense to the other non-Jewish spouse, whatever. But you can't say it's okay. I mean, that's what they want. They want more than anything else. For you, either as a Noahide or as an Orthodox Jew, whatever, to say it's okay. That's a problem. That is the problem. Yeah. Yeah, you can say, well, if you're happy, very good, but you're not saying that it's a good thing. They're going to see through that, right? You're not gonna, win anything over here. But you don't have to ram it down their throat either. They probably know what you think. But you have to have ground rules, right? You certainly should have ground rules. So yeah, they could be the nicest person. You can go out with them, this and that. Going out with their with their if they have a spouse or significant other or whatever, so that's an issue, right? That's certainly that is certainly an issue. Now, homosexuality is also forbidden for a non-Jew, right? It goes against the Noahide law, so it's also death penalty, right? For non-Jew, not all the Noahide laws are death penalty, but this is one of them. When it comes to immorality, forbidden relationships, most of them are death penalty. For non-Jews. So you can't acknowledge it. You can't say it's a good thing, even if they're a nice person. You can't say, well, you support what they do. That you can't do. Right? Or that lifestyle. You can't say you think that lifestyle is good. Right? They're probably not expecting it, but you can't, you can't acknowledge it. You can't say it's a good thing. So therefore what? Can you go out with them? Can you hang out with them? You could. They could be the nicest person. Okay, what do you do with their spouse or significant other? Right? That's going to be a problem. Right? That's going to be a problem. Now, aren't they going to get totally offended? Probably. They could say it's all or nothing. Either get me with them or not. Right? Right? So having them over is acknowledging. That's acknowledging. Yeah. That's saying it's okay. That you can't do. Can you go out with them by yourself? Yes. Yeah. With anyone else attached to them? No. Right? For a Jew or a non-Jew, because you can't acknowledge it. Right? You can't say it's okay. That's what they want. Right? This, they're still your relative, someone says. True. Right? Even they dress a different way and this, that. Okay, but there's a difference. There's a difference over there. They're still your relative. Yeah, you can have them over. That's not an issue. Can you bring their spouse, quote unquote, with them? That's the issue. They're your relative. The other person's not your relative. Doesn't matter if they're married, quote unquote, legally or not. Right? That you can't do. That's an issue. Because then you're acknowledging. You're acknowledging both. Yeah, and then, and people will say, well, this is your family. This is blood. Okay. And spiritually, not my blood. Spiritually, the kids aren't Jewish. Yeah. It's painful. We don't like to be rabble rousers for the sake of being rabble rousers, but there's certain things you can't acknowledge. Yeah. So people will say religion is not supposed to break up families. You're right. 100% is not supposed to. If you keep it the right way, it won't. If you don't keep it the right way, you have to I didn't do anything wrong. Oh, I beg to differ. Did you read the Torah? You see what it says? What into marriage? Oh, you didn't read that part. Okay. The Torah says it's forbidden. I will buy the Torah, so I have to say it's forbidden. The person's the nicest person, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But you made a choice, right? Remember, everybody makes a choice. And that choice comes with repercussions. right? So a person could say, well, I haven't changed. I haven't done anything wrong, quote unquote. You're the one that changed. So what's the easy argument if you're a Jew? You say, I reconnected to that. I'm a link in a chain, goes back to giving the Torah Mount Sinai. So I didn't change. I'm reconnecting that link. But you went against the link. You broke the link. That's a good way to break the link into marriage. Yeah. You broke the link. So who changed? We have a tradition going back more than 3,000 years. You totally shredded that link. So who changed? They don't want to hear that, but that's the argument. That is the argument. Now they'll say, blood is blood. Yeah, this is your family, acknowledge it. The kids aren't Jewish. They're not part of my family. It's nothing personal, right? Nothing personal. It's not anything personal. It's not their fault. It's totally not their fault, but you got to draw, there's a line that's been drawn here. And what they want more than anything else is they want acknowledgement, especially from an Orthodox Jew to say it's okay. Because everyone else and their mother says it's okay. Why can't you say it's okay? Same thing by Haman, Mr. Haman himself. Everyone bows down to him, right? The big avodah zarah, big idol that he was. Everyone bowed down to him except one old Jew. This old Jew, Mordechai, refused to bow. Haman gets so upset, he said, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill his entire people. One old Jew doesn't bow. This person's got power, he's got ego, he's got money. Right? He's got a lot of things. One person doesn't bow down, big deal. Everyone else bowing down, worshiping, but he says it's all worth nothing, he says to his wife Zeresh. It's all worth nothing because I see this old Jew doesn't bow. Yeah, why did it bother him so much? Because he knows what the truth is. He knows deep in his heart what the truth is. And he can't stand to see that because everyone else is flattering him, but he knows what the truth is. And he knows that this old Jew knows what the truth is. And that eats him alive. Same thing, right? You have 10,000, 50,000 people say, beautiful family, beautiful spouse, even though I'm not Jewish, whatever, One old Jew says, you know what, that's forbidden. Torah says forbidden, you're in trouble. You're in serious trouble. Your kids aren't really your kids, they're not really Jewish. You're in serious trouble. But everyone else, 50,000 people say, you're God's gift to the world, everyone loves you, and they love your spouse, and look how great, look how your kids turned out, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's saying that and worshiping them except one person. Except one old Orthodox Jew. Yeah. They can't stand it. Why? Because all the 50,000 people that are bowing down to them doesn't matter. Because one person is telling them they're wrong. And they know deep down, because they have that pintel yid, they have the spark of a Jew, right? That's inside every Jew. That spark they know. They may justify it and give you Webster's 8th definition why it's okay to marry, a non-Jew. Right, they'll tell you what it mean for that generation, and they give you all kinds of answers. Yeah, obviously not the right one. Obviously not the right one. Yeah, and they'll say, "Oh, you're a fanatic. You're this. You're that." Good, but you don't have an answer here. The Torah says more than half a dozen times. Even if you want to tell me it's written by man, not to intermarry. So, what do you think they meant? Tell me, what do you think they meant? I said this song. What do you think they meant? That generation? Maybe the only generation went into the land. I mean, I'm open to suggestions. I'm open to, verses in Tanakh that I probably don't know, different Gemaras I probably don't remember. Okay, I'm open. I'm open to what different commentaries may say that's factual. I'm more than being open. So what was the answer? When you have nothing else to say? Yeah, you're a fanatic. You're right, I'm a fanatic, but you didn't give me an answer. You did not give me an answer. That was the end of the conversation. Checkmate. You don't have an answer. I know you don't have an answer because you can't have an answer. I can have an answer. You didn't tell me, well, the Torah's not true and I don't believe in God. Okay. Or even if it is true, I don't have to keep it. Okay. That was a bad answer. Give all kinds of answers, but not the right one. Because the right answer is it's wrong. That's the right answer. They don't want to hear it's wrong. Even though everyone tells them, beautiful family, beautiful this, beautiful that, or whatever. Everyone tells them. Everyone sucks up to them. Very good. Everyone sucks up to them except the one that knows what the truth is. And the one who knows what the truth is saying is not good. And the one who knows the truth is saying it's forbidden. They don't want to hear that. They for sure do not want to hear that. Right? But they know it's the truth. They'll come out, they'll yell and scream and say all these other things don't make any sense. Yeah? They'll say it, but you know and they know it's a bunch of malarkey. Right? It's a bunch of garbage, yeah? They don't have what to say. They'll just say you're a fanatic. Okay. We call worse. It's a compliment by me, yeah. I've been called a lot worse. Okay. Yeah, but the Torah is true, then you're wrong. And you're going to pay a serious price, either in this world or the next or both. Because if you ask any Jew, in general, as we always say, they're associated with the synagogue, you ask them, is it permissible or not according to the Old Testament, according to the Bible, whatever you want to call it, according to the Torah, 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, I don't know, give it a lot of different names here, right? Are you allowed to, is a Jew allowed to marry a non-Jew, yes or no? They'll say no, but no, it's yes or no. The answer is no. That's it. It's forbidden. Even if it's written by men. It's forbidden. Right? Because it destroys Judaism, which is the single biggest problem today. Someone says not taught morals or consequences, right? Right? Nobody wants to hear about consequences. Nobody wants to hear about that. Apparently, it's the children with higher morals. Sure. They would not be in the statistic like everybody else, 100%. But they're not. Unless you're Bible thumpers or whatever. But most people are not teaching the kids morals. They're not teaching the kids anything. They just, some parents will say, well, they probably know more than me anyway, but, about these things or whatever. So, what do I have to say? I don't know. You should give them morals. They should have morals. There are plenty of people out there who don't give the kids anything. They don't give them anything. No morals, no nothing. Yeah. It's unfortunate. Yeah, they'll figure it out. Or I've heard people say, I'll let my kids figure out what religion. Really? What age? Whatever. They'll make their own choice. Okay? Those are the kids of death. Yeah. Now, even if you raise them a certain way, doesn't mean they're going to stay that way. Okay. Yeah. Within the Orthodox, there is a dropout rate. Okay. For a lot of different reasons. Not the point. Not everyone's a cookie cutter. Not everyone, fits in the system, whatever. Very good. Even if that's the case, you gave them something. You gave them the ability to succeed, right? Here, you didn't give them any ability to do anything because they have no structure, right? They have zero structure. If they have zero structure, what do you expect? What in the world do you expect? Someone told me, well, my daughter got married, whatever. She ended up marrying a non-Jew. Okay, so she did what you did. You also married non-Jews. So what do you expect? Why does it matter? Now, deep down, it matters to them. But see, if they say anything, they're in trouble. Someone said, someone has, someone has kids and the kids intermarry. Now, parents, let's say, are secular, so they can't say anything against it. They may want their kids to marry a Jew, but why can't they say anything against it? Because they don't uphold what the Torah says. They're going to call them racist. I called someone a racist once. Not a good idea, but, they're telling me, a Jew should marry a Jew. I said, why? They said, because the Jew should marry a Jew. I said, that makes you racist. What do you have against non-Jews? They're like, you also hold that Jews, should only marry Jews and not non-Jews. I said, you're right. So why aren't you a racist? I said, I'm not a racist because the Torah says. Right? I believe in God. I believe in what God says in the Torah. Pass it down to Moses, gave it to us. The Torah says you're not allowed to intermarry. Now, you can tell me, God, the Torah, according, God, the Jewish people in the Torah, is against non-Jews. Right? Could be. Right? It could be we're anti-pig, we're anti-other things. Okay, we're also anti-non-Jews. We don't want non-Jews, marrying Jews. Right? Unless they convert and they convert properly. Okay. So you say we hate non-Jews. Say whatever you want. But if you have so many people intermarrying, it's a disaster. And that's what's going on today. 50, 60, 70, different places, 70% intermarriage. That is the single biggest problem today. Yeah. So, at least they marry someone Jewish, okay? At least they got a shot. At least they got a shot somewhere. Maybe they'll give them good values, but yeah, that's a problem. What values did they give that are absolute? They don't. They don't have values that are absolute. So what do they give them? Some people don't give them anything. They just let them figure it out for themselves. Parents have an obligation to educate their kids. Certainly Jews have an obligation to teach their kids Torah. If they can't, if they can, they find someone to, or send them to a Jewish school. If they don't want to do that, okay. Well, the kids will come out worse. Come out more like non-Jews, worse than non-Jews in different ways. Yeah, they don't have any Jewish value. Someone told me, very interesting, someone told me many years ago, they're in college, and they said they're more attracted to non-Jews. This is someone who's very Jewish, I wouldn't say had a lot of knowledge, still don't have a lot of knowledge, but, very Jewishy, let's say. And they asked me, they said, why is it I'm more attracted to non-Jews than Jews? So I said, are you really asking the question? You want to hear an answer? I said, yeah. Like, what do you think? I said, if Jews act, like non-Jews, if Jews act like non-Jews in general, then they're gonna be, first of all, not gonna have so many Jewish values, let's say, and in certain ways, it'll be worse than non-Jews. Do things worse, right? So therefore, if a Jew is more like a non-Jew, then what's the difference? Then you'd be more attracted to a non-Jew than a Jew. I said that, that makes sense. They thought it was like the craziest thing. I said, if Jews are stuck up, let's say, and it's all about just belonging to a club, but it has nothing to do with Torah or mitzvahs, yeah, then, someone going to be attracted to that? I don't know. They're going to have proper values, proper morals. What's keeping them grounded? They say, well, non-Jews are not grounded either. It could be, right? It could be, but we could be worse. So therefore, a person can be attracted to a non-Jew more than a Jew. Makes sense. They're like totally shocked. They're like, they're not marrying a Jew in the end, but whatever. Kind of miraculous in different ways, but that was a question. That was a question that was whatever, a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah, it's not many people are going to ask that question. Because not many people are going to care in that generation. They're not going to care. Marry a Jew, don't marry a Jew. Like, who cares? Doesn't mean anything. This person, by the way, just throws out that they married a Jew. They married a Jew, just throw the story out there. They married a Jew, but they didn't want God mentioned at the ceremony. They don't want God's name mentioned at the ceremony. So whatever, they were convinced why, it's a good thing to have these blessings or whatever, right? But somebody asked me, said, how can that be? How can that be? Went to Jewish camp, more, I think, quote unquote, more Jewish than, other kids and have like maybe a stronger Jewish education, Jewish identity. How could they say they don't want God mentioned at their wedding? So again, I asked the same question. I said, you want an answer? Or are you just asking the question? I said, no, what do you think? So I said, a Torah without, Judaism without Torah mitzvahs is like cholent without the meat and potatoes. What does that mean? It means if you don't have Torah mitzvahs, then what's keeping you Jewish? Eating gefilte fish? Going to synagogue once a year? What Jewish values do you have? Yeah, what's holding you together Jewishly? Nothing. Nothing. So you have all these non-Jewish values, for better or for worse, probably for worse. So you have all these bad values, let's say, all these leftist values, let's say. Yeah. So is it surprising you're not going to have God in your life? No, I wouldn't say this person, they've had setbacks. They have different setbacks, different things, which everybody has. So I don't think they have a legitimate reason at all to be angry at God for things they've gone through. Certain things. Yeah. But they don't want to mention God. They don't want to mention God. So the person was kind of shocked. They're like, yeah, we gave him halfway decent education. Okay, not Orthodox, this, that. Yeah, I said, but what do you expect? You can't expect somebody that doesn't hold by Torah and mitzvahs. You can't expect them to have values. They have Jewish values. But not to mention God at the ceremony, they don't care. They simply don't care. How are you going to get someone to care? The only way you get someone to care is they have to keep what it says. You have to do what it says. You have to understand it to the best of your ability. Again, is that a guarantee? It's not a guarantee. Right? 2 guarantees in life, death and taxes. Right? Not necessarily in that order. That's not a guarantee. Right? Any person went to the best schools and this and that. It's not a guarantee they're going to keep it, but you got a much better chance. Much, much better chance. Right? I had people, when I was younger, see what happens to your kids, right? Everyone cursed me. See what happens with your kids. I said, at least my kids, whatever happens to them, they are going to know what Torah is. Everybody else doesn't have a clue what Torah is. So if they don't have a clue what Torah is and they go off the rails, even if they were somewhat religious, this and that, that's not surprising. Because they don't have the real thing. And they don't know what the real thing is. Yeah, now they think they don't need it, they don't want it, or whatever. Okay. But I said, if you were part of the system, for better or for worse, yeah, you know what it is. You can't say you don't know what it is. You were taught. You were taught in that system. So you know what it is. You 100% know what it is. These people don't have a clue what it is. And they'll never have a clue till they'll die unless they change. They will not have a clue. So is that surprising? No. So so the same person, when I told them that it makes perfect sense, they'd be attracted to non-Jews more than Jews, they're like totally shocked. I said, but it makes perfect sense. If a Jew wants to be more like a non-Jew, what's the difference? What's the major difference between a Jew and a non-Jew, right? In general. So the joke is, a non-Jew, if he's vice president, he's happy being vice president. If a Jew's vice president, why not president? Right? Now again, you might have, non-Jews that want to be president also, but, who was that? I forget which prime minister said to one of the American presidents, oh, you're just in charge of, 250 million, people, whatever. He said, I'm in charge of 6 million people that want to be prime ministers, right? So it's harder. You're dealing with Jews, right? So it's much harder, so to speak. That's the difference. But, we're our own worst enemies. So, if we're going Jewish route, we go 100%. We go to the end. Either, the Jewish people are going to rise themselves to the highest level or they're going to go straight in the garbage, right? There's nothing in between. You have Jews that raise themselves to high spiritual levels and others that are devil worshippers. And others doing, being Messianic Jews. A lot of the heads of the Messianic movements, that are Christians, essentially Christians, are Jews. Yeah, so we're our own worst enemy. If we do the right thing, it's beautiful. If we do the wrong thing, it's chaotic. It's totally chaotic. Yeah. Right. Let's give one example how far it goes. Imagine you got this reform group called Women at the Wall. Yeah, all they want to do is provoke Orthodox Jews to have their own, prayer service at the Western Wall and this and that. And what's the most important thing to them? What's one of the most important things to them? To read from a Torah scroll, but they never get a Torah scroll. Yeah, they won't give them a Torah scroll. So last time they tried different things to bring a Torah scroll in, like smuggle it in. Yeah, smuggle it in. One thing they recently did, months ago, they caught them. I don't know if they cut it up exactly what they did. Try to attach it to their bodies. Try to attach it to their bodies and smuggle it in. Is there any greater desecration of a Torah scroll than that? On any body, not just a woman. I'm not going to pick on women here. Right? On a guy's body. You want to put a Torah scroll, wrap it around you so you can squeeze, a tiny Torah scroll, let's say. Very small Torah scroll. So you wrap it around a person's body. So, try and smuggle it in. That's insanity. That's desecration of a Torah scroll. But they want to show it. They have the ability to do it. So they'll do whatever it takes. But I could be here till tomorrow, which I won't be. Right? I'll be here, I could be here till tomorrow telling these crazy things. These crazy things. And people say, but that's what they believe. You can't come out against it. It's insanity. It's absolutely insanity. We always say, the truth is always greater than fiction. There are things you cannot, you can't make up. You cannot make up these things. I can't, I can't say I'm never shocked, but the more things I hear, I was like, it's just man's craziness. But again, we do it to ourselves. Right? So, When we do things, we'll do it even worse, right? That's the point. And we'll act worse if you don't have Torah mitzvahs, right? So the person says, wow, it's really surprising I'm attracted to non-Jews more than Jews. No, because when non-Jews don't do the right thing, they're worse. They become a lot worse. So it makes perfect sense. They're like totally shocked. Right? You're probably the only one that would say such a thing. I said, no, I'm not the only one. Right? Any Orthodox Jew would tell you that. Right? Anyone else would say, yeah, it's kind of strange. Why are you not attracted to Jews? It makes perfect sense. Because they don't have values of Jews. Not that this person had any values of Jews either in general. They're not values. They don't have eternal values. What happens when you don't have eternal values? Right? That's what someone had pointed out. Right? Parents don't teach them any higher values. So what happens? It's chaos. They'll pick their own values. And where do they get them from? Where do they get their values from? Social media. Where do they get it from? The media in general. Yeah. They don't get it from wholesome places. So if they don't get it from wholesome places, is it shocking how people turn out? No. I had somebody, a doctor once tell me, a prominent doctor once told me many years ago, that, I was offended by the way I dress. I'm like, what's the problem with the way I dress? Black pants with or without pinstripes, with a white shirt, dark blue with or without pinstripes, or dark gray, whatever. And I said, I wear a hat, I have a yarmulke, I wear tzitzis, very good. I was like, so, what's offensive? I said, let me ask you. I said, if, I just graduated college and whatever, I got a mohawk, I sat in your roof every day, smoking pot and singing Kumbaya on my guitar. Would you think there's anything wrong with that? This person's thinking and thinking. Just a prominent doctor, not an idiot, right? In general. Yeah. This guy's thinking. I was like, you have to think, really? You have to ask yourself if that's like morally okay? Or that's normal? Here I want to give, good values to my kids, probably educate them the Jewish way, blah, blah, blah. Right? And of course, that's weird, but getting a mohawk and, smoking pot on your roof every day, like that doesn't bother you. Like you have to really think if that would bother you. Right? Dee, 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 dee. I play Jeopardy theme song. Like, come on. Right? Does that make sense? That make any sense? The person with person had to think about it. What's there to think about? War values? What do you think? Gonna be Taliban or who knows what? Good values, quote unquote, normal, this and that. Want to raise a wholesome family? Yeah, within reason, very good. So what's the problem? Getting a mohawk doesn't bother you? If I had an earring pierced, all of my body, that wouldn't bother you. Would that bother you? If someone, much older than me, yeah, that wouldn't bother you. I'm talking like 25 years ago, 30 years ago. We're going to think about it. It's insanity. That's absolute insanity. Body piercing back in the day, no, it doesn't bother me. Mohawk, no, it doesn't bother me. Smoking pot doing nothing with your life, no, it doesn't bother me. You being an Orthodox Jew, that bothers me. Okay, where's the logic? Because anyone's an Orthodox Jew, no matter what you do, you don't have to say anything. They think they're being judged. You're saying I'm not Jewish. I didn't say you weren't Jewish. Is your mother Jewish? Then you're Jewish. Yeah, I didn't say you weren't Jewish. Yeah, you don't think I'm as Jewish. Not me for to decide. You hold by what the Torah says, you don't hold by what the Torah says. Right? I'm not making any decisions. God will judge. But you think, I don't think anything. Right? You want to live the way you want to? It's your choice. Is it going to be payback if you don't do the right thing? There'll be payback. Not my choice. Nobody cares what I think in general. Yeah. You'll make your own decision, but realize there are repercussions for your actions. There are repercussions. Right? But someone here asks a good question. Why don't parents teach their kids anything? They're afraid. In general. They don't want discipline so much. They don't want them to walk out on their lives. They don't want to lose their kids. See, in the Orthodox community also. People afraid to discipline the kid will say, I'm never going to be religious, it's your fault. They want to cut them some slack and you don't want to interfere too much and, different things. People go through all kinds of things, but, at the end of the day, you got to give values. Yeah, you got to get values. Now, where do people get their values from? You could tell me back in the day people were more moral. I don't know. A lot of things were hidden behind closed doors, so maybe yes, maybe no. But the basic values, my non-Jews have that basic values. Basic universal values. Today it's gone out the window, right? You see the way people talk, how they treat, how they treat their parents, different things. You see it. I see pretty clear because they're not proper values, right? In Orthodox home, you see much clearer. A parent walks in the room, kid will stand up at least once a day, right? Honor, respect, can I get you this, can I get you that, different things. It's different. It's totally different. It should be different, but again, that's because you're being guided by the Torah, right? Totally being guided by the Torah. If you're not guided by the Torah, then what are you guided by? Guided by what your heart tells you, what society tells you. Yeah. So there mentions, Carl found hard to find Jews that actually put Hashem first. Listen, people live their lives. People have busy lives. Not, excusing it, right? But they make brachas, they make blessings the way they shouldn't. They do other things that they shouldn't. They're caught up in life in general. Yeah, Jewish people have to be role models, 100%. Have to be role models. I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any question. But you know what? Sometimes someone will say there aren't so many role models. Could be. Right? Very good. Very well could be. There are though. There definitely are people that are role models. Right? You just have to find them. You have to find them. But we're our own worst enemy. A lot of mitzvahs people do, which are good, and the other mitzvahs they have nothing to do with. Helping converts, helping Bali Tshuva, not for them. Okay, but again, if we're out there, we gotta help. We gotta do whatever we can. We can't just, look the other way. Now, someone ever says that can be aggravating. Yeah, it could be. Right? But there are a lot of good Jews out there also. I'm not gonna throw everyone under the bus. There are a lot of good Jews out there also. You're just gonna find them. And they're out there, 100%. There are a lot of good people out there. Other people like average run of the mill that don't necessarily live inspiring lives, but whatever, they do keep Torah mitzvahs to a certain extent. Okay, yeah, but if you're in a place where most people don't keep Torah mitzvahs or they keep somewhat but not too much, whatever. So yeah, you get that anywhere. Some people are stronger, some people not. Depends on the type of community. So if you're in a weaker community, you'll see more of it, right? That's not uncommon, right? You definitely see. More of it. And a person, is part of a Chabad community, they'll see a lot more of it because most of the people they're catering to are not religious Jews. So a lot of those not religious Jews barely keep Shabbos, barely keep kosher, barely keep many other things. So yeah, they can't be role models. They shouldn't be role models in general unless they're growing and striving and whatever. So you can have that. But in a smaller type community, you'll have a problem finding that. Right? That's true. You will have, problem, finding that outside, maybe outside the rabbi, the community, whatever. But that won't be an easy thing to find, right? That that is, again, depends what type of community. You live in a much stronger community, yeah. Some people do more, some people do less. Some people more inspired, less inspired, but that's a totally different thing. That's a totally different thing. Yeah, people have busy lives, but everyone should be living inspired. So there are much stronger communities. There aren't people living inspired. A lot of people living inspired. Depends where you are. Yeah, let me see. Any other questions? All right, I got to stop here. I do this every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kalman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I get videos, Q&As, ethics of our fathers, Book of Leviticus. Want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKalman@gmail.com, RBBICHIMCOFFMAN at gmail.com, whichever good. Beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day, and